Welcome everyone. To kickstart the second half of the Business Conclave 2020, we have Mr. B. Srinivasan, Managing Director of the 95-year-old Vikatan Group. Mr. Srini is a third-generation entrepreneur who joined his family business when Vikatan Group was print-only magazine publisher in 1990. Realizing the significance of communities, advent of personalization, emergence of TV mediums, and the surge of the internet, Mr. Srini spearheaded Vikatans' diversification through niche magazines and adopted internet publishing in 1997, went pay in 2005, and has been trending on social media since 2010. He also entered content production for TV in 1998, and during the last 2 decades, produced continuous top-rated shows in Tamil. Since 2016, the Vikatan Group has created and curated popular event properties and client-led activations. Today, the Vikatan Group is a diversified media house with 8 magazine titles in Tamil, boasting a combined sales of over 50 million copies, 1 million books, over 2 million annual page views from an 8 million unique visitor base on the internet. With its 20 million followers on social network, Vikatan is India's largest Tamil internet ecosystem. Having evangelized the digital-first approach in content creation, curation, and publishing at Vikatan Group, he is re-engineering Vikatan's culture by investing heavily in people, processes, and workflows, while ensuring that the consumer is kept at the heart of everything that Vikatan stands for, while firmly staying entrenched in Vikatan's timeless value systems. With storytelling skills honed for almost a century, the Anand Vikatan Group is now gearing up to become a full-fledged content engine for OTT platforms and emerging as an independent digital media content and creative powerhouse, which it plans to do by the century of 2026. To engage Mr. Srini in this session, I would like to call upon Professor B. Srinivasan. Professor B. Srinivasan.
R. Srinivasan.
I'm very sorry, yeah. Professor R. Srinivasan. That's the whole thing, yeah. Professor R. Srinivasan, my apologies. So Professor is a distinguished member in the strategy area of the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. His areas of interest include strategies of multi-sided platform organizations, strategy processes in rapid growth organizations, and competitive corporate and international strategies. Professor Srinivasan has co-authored a textbook on strategic management and a research-based book on knowledge management in the Indian context. He has also undertaken consulting projects for various large organizations on strategic planning and restructuring. With this, I request Professor Srinivasan to kickstart the session. Audience can continue typing your questions through the Menti code that will be provided through the chat. Over to you, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to talk to Mr. Srinivasan. And I really don't understand why you put this session title as Srini versus Srini. We're not going to fight. We're going to have a chat. It's always a pleasure to talk to other Srinivasans. There are lots of them, plenty of them around. And when you talk about one Srinivasan and another Srinivasan, there are enough of us available in the world today. Even on campus, the last count we had was Srinivasan as a first name. We have 4 of us, and Srinivasan as spouse's name, which effectively ensures that the last name, there are 3 of us. And we have recently had 3 R. Srinivasans. One of them just retired. So the confusion continues and persists. One of the things that I want to highlight to this audience, quite a lot of you may not have known this group as much as all the people who have spoken, who speak Tamil or who have ever lived in Tamil Nadu. You surely would have come across this Vikatan Group. But for the rest of the audience, Vikatan Group is, as the moderator or owner of this conclave told you, that is 95 years old. More than the 95 years old, it has never had a single break. If you think of a 95-year-old, we are talking about Indian independence, we are talking about emergency, we are talking about variety of things that have happened in the economy, in the publishing industry, and this company hasn't had a single break. This company hasn't missed a single issue throughout all of these years. And given the print magazine, printing also has printing as an operations, manufacturing operations, and printing operations, given the industrial relations scenario in India, has also went through different kinds of ebbs and flows, and they've survived all of these. More than the survival of all of these, I would not want to call it a survival, but I would want to call it as a persistence. They've persisted. They're beyond survival, they've persisted. And that's what makes this Decadent Group and this chat with Srini very interesting, is because Mr. Srinivasan not only represents the third generation of the family business, but in fact, if you look at a lot of these the third generation family businesses, a lot of foundations of the current business would have been laid in the first and second generation business. But what Vicodin stands for today is largely happened post Srinivasan's taking over in the last 30 years, from 1990 to 2020. The last 30 years had seen so many changes that we know of what is Vicodin Group today. Not to discredit his father and grandfather, they are legends in their own. They have built iconic corporations like the Gemini Studios and a variety of other things. But if I go back and look at Vicodin Group today, a lot of Vicodin Group today is thanks to what Srinivasan has done today. I want to come back to you. And the introduction, we talked about television and all of that. You also ventured briefly into movies as well. But over the last 30 years, even the 40, 50 years of our lifetimes, what are the changes that have happened in the reading habits? How have people changed? How have people consumed content?
Thank you, Professor, for having me here. Thank you, Ashwin, for the wonderful introduction, and thanks so much for all of you who are tuned in and who are listening. It's a pleasure and privilege for me. In fact, I proudly told my mom today that I am speaking at the IIM Business School in Bangalore. I'm speaking at an event at the business school because she always wanted me to do an MBA. But I joined my business after I finished my graduation. So she always had that challenge. Before I get to the question that you are asking, I wanted to add some perspective. I want to clarify to you that we have had two breaks in print, especially. One happened in the 30s. I cannot exactly recall the year, but I can tell you that was the time when there was a restriction on paper, which was brought in by the government of the British government, against which, and they told us that we were supposed to only write certain things and we were not supposed to write certain things. And we were supposed to pay a fine. If we continued to write certain things, we paid a fine. The second time we were asked to stop. For 3 months, we stopped. And then we restarted. That happened in the 30s once. And the next time happened during the pandemic for 3 weeks. We actually couldn't print, publish, distribute for 3 weeks during that time. But gladly, we are back from that. So that's one point I wanted to clarify. The second that I wanted to clarify is that we didn't start off as a printer.
Yeah.
Printing was brought in as a method of making us more economically viable. So when scale brought in printing, and just like you said, industrial relations have been extremely challenging. And ever since I joined, nearly for 25 years, I was having multiple love-hate relationships with the industrial relations. And about 4 years back, we completely ceased our printing operations, and now we are completely outsourced. So we've come a kind of a full circle. Even though economically it may be viable to have your own printing operation, we are not necessarily doing it now, right? So let me come to the main question. How have reading habits changed? Okay, I don't think there is anybody in the audience who is likely to have known what it was like in the 90s or in the early 90s. Okay, you're all, the millennial kids, and most of you, I think. If there are anyone who would have known about the state of the media in the 90s, you could just put up your hands. I think there would be very few of us here. Just imagine a world. I don't even know if you can imagine this world, but just try and paint a picture. You do not have cable television. There is no satellite television. There is no cable television. There is absolutely no question of having a mobile in your hand. We were still in the dial-up telephone, and the only entertainment that you could go for was the movies, which used to happen once a week. You needed to go to the theaters. Not everybody could go to the theaters, and every week we would not have a new release. We would have releases once in a while. Okay, and especially the bigger movies, it would come really once in a blue moon, right? So the biggest form of entertainment at that point of time was Chitrahar, or Oli Molium as it was known in Tamil, and the Sunday blockbuster movie. Literally beyond that, there was nothing. And television was only Doordarshan. Okay, also imagine a world, there is no FM radio, right? Absolutely no FM. There's only AM, where we used to, most of us, for real good quality radio, we used to tune into Sri Lankan Broadcasting Corporation, SLBC, which was one of the really happening radios at that point of time, and that was coming in medium wave, not even an AM, right? So and cricket is 5-day cricket, and at times we used to have one day international 50 overs. That's it. So just try and rewind yourself to this world. In this world, magazines were literally the only alternate source of entertainment. So the reading habit, which we are talking today, has kind of dithered. It has actually not dithered. It has split into multiple forms and multiple mediums and multiple perspectives. And entertainment as a rule has, where it used to be focused on, literally newspapers used to only carry news. Just imagine newspapers today, Times of India or Economic Times carries a Times View, or they carry, so many perspectives. In those days, there were no perspectives. Newspapers used to simply carry news. In fact, how, for example, I'm just going to jumpstart. Junior Vigadan as a magazine is one of our, okay, it's not a kids magazine. It's a junior to Ananda Vigadan. That's how the nomenclature came. So it was the second magazine that we started from our group. And that was a socio-political magazine, which was started in 1983. Now, one of our icons at that point of time, living legend MGR, who was then the chief minister, had fallen seriously ill, and he was transported to Brooklyn hospital in the US for surgery and treatment. Now, today, all of this through social media, everything, you will get everything. So in those days, there used to be only Doordarshan, there used to be newspapers, both of which used to only report the bulletin as given by the government or the hospital in Brooklyn. Now, we had a reporter who was based out of New York, who traveled to Brooklyn. He stayed in the hospital and he gave us inside information by literally every day. And we used to gather that information, and Junior Vigadan actually skyrocketed during that time because we were giving the back-end information which nobody else was giving. Now, just imagine that in today's day. Junior Vigadan today is still, if it is still holding significance, then we are trying to do something to keep ourselves more relevant, because news is available everywhere, in every medium, in every possible respect. So we are competing with our own readers who, rather than just consume the news, today are even supplying the news. They are creating their own communities. And in fact, they are the Davids who are trying to oust the Goliaths. According to them, the big media is something which is always corrupt, and they always take sides, and they don't want to give the right news. So the right news is always with them, which is their opinion. And their opinion actually goes out as news. And that news is being challenged as saying, nobody else is carrying this news. How come? Why don't you guys ask the big media about this? So, that is kind of the transformation from where I started 30 years ago to now. And I have to say, at this point of time, I feel pretty much like a dinosaur. But yeah, 30 years ago, it was a completely different world.
So if I philosophically paraphrase what you're saying, we're actually defining what is truth.
Yeah. So again, today, truth is in the eye of the beholder, whether we like to believe it or not. Now, we used to say this about beauty at one point of time.
Right.
And today it has become the truth, because what I choose to believe as the truth is my truth, not necessarily the truth. So we as a magazine medium where we were always told that never take one person's perspective, one person's angle, always take multiple angles. We are now being chastised by some of our readers saying that you're not taking a stand. I say, how can I take a stand? We have to tell you what happened according to A and what happened according to B. And we have to only give you the circumstances and we can give you the perspective for you to draw the conclusion. You cannot expect me or the magazine to say, take this, this is what is the reality. But many people today, thanks to the social media, the kind of alternate reality that it is building. I'm sorry if I'm sounding like Trump. I don't mean to sound like Trump. But being in the media is actually very frustrating. Even though he keeps calling us fake news, we are actually finding that in the social media perspective, even holding on to the values of news and a perspective is actually very difficult. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
So from a consumer standpoint, in fact, the consumer is actually not seeking truth. The consumer is actually seeking entertainment. So this convergence of news and entertainment is what is, he wants a conversation starter.
Yeah.
From the news. The news is actually a social media conversation starter.
Yeah, and that's where the Sushant Singhs of the world come in. May he rest in peace. But what's happening is that the news cycles are being jump started and hijacked by certain events and certain if I believe that this is something which can have a longer shelf life, and if this can create more controversy, and if it can therefore create more eyeballs, then I want to be in it. So when a relatively, I don't want to use the word responsible, but at least a relatively centered kind of news organization wants to deal with this, they are seen as somebody who is away from the news, and they are not seen as somebody who's actually trying to provide perspective. Yeah, so news as entertainment is extremely dangerous, and that's what's happening to the world today.
And going one step behind, people were used to consume content in either news or in magazines or stories or long reads. They would consume content passively. All of these technologies, whether it's radio, whether it's television, or even internet, allowed us to not only consume, but also to interact.
Yeah.
There's also a whole story about how readers or viewers can actually shape the content.
Yeah.
Right? Interactivity is the key in this convergence today. How has Vikatan got this interactivity in the magazines, in the television?
Yeah. So I think let me be clear about something. I am not dissing the social media. That's not the point here. The
Right.
point is social media has truly democratized news. It has removed the gatekeepers. Effectively, publishers used to be the gatekeepers, and we do understand that today there is no gatekeeper. The only gatekeeper is oneself, right?
Right.
How far do I want to go? How much do I want to say? And whom do I want to connect with? And how do I want that interaction to be? Those are the levels of gatekeeping that each individual or each community chooses to do for themselves. And it is not, I am not suggesting for a moment that that is wrong or that is uncalled for. That is truly the democratization of media, right? So, from this perspective, we have embraced this media. So when you can't beat them, you join them. So when the social media came up in a big way, we started off both on, we are on Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and we are in all the probable mediums in which communities are available, and we attempt to build our own communities there. And it's right from seeking. So earlier, Vikatan has always been attempting to keep itself very interactive, because right from asking readers to rate their stories, asking readers to write in their short stories, asking readers to participate in various contests that used to kept on being. We used to actually carry a contest by which we would carry a mistake in a certain page. And we used to ask the readers, can you find out where the mistake is? And the first 100 readers used to get prizes for that. It was a different story that we had to make sure that there was only one mistake in that page, right? And that we were able to attribute that mistake, right? Otherwise, the printer's devil and proofing used to normally cause some mistakes also. But we used to point out a particular page and then we used to point out a particular mistake. So we've always attempted to be interactive. So that interactivity element has moved from being a postcard or a phone call to a click or a QR code, right? So I think we've just moved our interaction, and today we get short stories, we get poems, we get jokes, we even get articles. So as we speak today, we have 553 authors who are writing for us from all over the globe on our website on a monthly basis, and that number keeps on growing. It's called there's a hashtag called My Vigadan, right? So it's I am writing to My Vigadan and it's getting published. So we have reader writers, we have extraordinary level of kind of interactions that we're having, and beyond all of this, on Twitter we will ask questions, or rather we will ask people to ask questions which they want to ask the stars before we interview them. So we collate from those questions and we ask. So we are always attempting to interact through social media platforms, and we are always attempting to keep that engagement going, because today, frankly, in order for a traditional media house to stay relevant, we need to be able to keep the interaction and engagement going. And we need to show ourselves or even prove that the reader is the center of everything that we are attempting to do.
That's wonderful. Comes back to the business question. The economics is completely different. From a traditional publisher, we have a seriously different economics now. On the internet, on the social media, there's zero willingness to pay. Because content is supposed to be free on the internet. How does a media house, which is a content house, deal with this dinosaur, deal with this whole thing about content has to be free?
Yeah, so this is a question that has actually kept us, me and my colleagues, awake at night for years on end. And we truly believe that while democratization of content is extremely important, the fact checking, the quality, the clarity, the non-partisanship, as well as the kind of depth of the information which goes out needs to have some remuneration to it. So I'll give you the simplest analogy which I can give you is that on YouTube, everything that I watch is for free. But on Netflix, if I have to watch, I have to pay, right? So we have attempted to move our digital offering closer to a Netflix, or at least, let me put it this way, closer to a Hotstar, where there is a freemium model. So there is content which could otherwise be available on the public domain too. So typically news, current affairs, everything which is non-specific will be part of the freemium, free offering. But anything which is depth, anything which is perspective, anything which requires true journalistic skills and has to parse through multiple layers of clarity before it reaches the customer, we attempt to keep it behind the paywall, and we attempt to give our readers some part of it for free to entice them to come in and start paying. Now, how successful have we been in this quest is the coin is up in the air and it's still tossing, right? We have gone pay since 2005.
Right.
And I have to say that, again I sound like a dinosaur, because we've been on the internet since 1998. Okay, ever since actually the those modems with those funny sounds used to be there. We've been on the internet since then, and since 2005 we went pay. We have had bits of fits and starts. It's not always been an uphill. When Geo came in and opened up the internet for consumption in 2016, we were having a relatively uh, upward kind of swing. And then after Geo, it kind of flattened out for a few years because, again, earlier, because I didn't know enough, I was still willing to pay. But then when I saw a barrage of content coming at me, now I still need to know why I need to pay for Vigadan, right? So there's been last few years, there had been a bit of a bit of a plateau. And then since last year and ever since COVID has struck, we are again on the upswing, because now there seems to be a certain need for people to look for authentic information. And when you're looking for something authentic, I guess this is where the brand comes into play, and the quality and the clarity of the content that we bring to the table seems to come into play. And I'm hoping that that is the way it's going to go in the future too. So we have had challenges in the past, and I don't believe we are going to run out of challenges in the days to come. As and when this media keeps evolving, I guess we will keep fighting it every step of the way.
So it's very interesting that you talk about the pandemic and OTT. During the pandemic, during the lockdown, towards the last few months of the lockdown, sorry, I shouldn't say years of the lockdown, which should not happen. In the last few months of the lockdown, you started your entry into OTT platforms. You got into the series in YouTube, the free
Yeah,
YouTube,
yeah.
not at the premium part of the OTT.
Correct.
Talk to us more about your OTT strategy.
So I have to again clarify here. This is not something that we designed during the pandemic.
Okay.
This entire plan of getting into OTT is a 2.5-year-old plan.
Okay.
Because when we knew that, okay, again, 22 years back, we got into television production.
Right.
And we've had an awesome run for the last nearly for 2 decades. We've had some really good programs, not just in Tamil. If there are anyone from the north here, if you've seen or heard of Pavitra Rishta, or you can go home and ask some folks about Pavitra Rishta, the Balaji production which came on Z, the story, and it's our story. So we had licensed it to Balaji, and it's come out in Z. So it's not just in Tamil. In the 4 southern languages, we have had a reasonably good success, and we've also gone pan-India with Pavitra Rishta. However, we realized nearly 3 years back that the television business is moving away from being there was a huge element of risk and reward in television business. So we used to risk our entire production on a product which could or need not work. When it worked, it gave us a bounty. But when it didn't work, it used to be a complete goner for us. But 3 years back, what started happening was that bounty started, pairing. And even when we had a success, we were really not able to make money out of it. And now it's come to a situation where it's literally a margin game. So you can make a 3 to 5% margin on this entire game. So we realized that this is what is happening. So 3 years ago, we decided that we should get into OTT as well as try to get into original productions on YouTube, because our YouTube numbers were burgeoning. So today we have about 6.5 million followers on YouTube, and every day our programs are hitting about till we were on television, we were hitting about 1.5 million views of every of our program on television. And very interestingly, our model is one where we hold the IPs for all our programs, unlike most of the other parts of the country where the channel holds the IPs. In the south, especially in Tamil Nadu, there is a good chance that the company itself owns their IP. So in this situation, we realized that television IPs were not giving us much return. So we started talking to YouTube. We got into a partnership with YouTube. In fact, we were the first in India to become a YouTube certified partner. And in that partnership, they have partially commissioned us to create a, a quality web content on YouTube.
Okay.
So we've come out with what we call the Digital First Daily Series, and that's an 80 episoder which just started last month. We are 20 episodes down as we speak. We are doing close to 500,000 views a day, and we are bringing the habit of getting to watch YouTube at a given time. Typically, YouTube watching is never by appointment. YouTube watching is by more about my own convenience, but we are trying to bring in appointment viewing in YouTube, and that's something that we are trying to groom. So that's happening. As far as YouTube is concerned, it's a joint venture between Group M, content motion content group, YouTube, and us. So that's the first, and we are hoping that should be the first. If we are able to actually break even and make some money on this, then we should be able to replicate this model in which there will be no absolutely no connection with television platforms. This will be exclusively on digital platforms. The next step that we took, again, a year and a half ago, we froze our first deal with Hotstar, and we are producing a story called November Story. It's starring Tamanna Bhatia, and it's likely to be released by Hotstar in February. Uh, those of you who are fans of Tamanna might have seen the teaser that came in about a little earlier this month. But so, and other than this, we have another 3 stories that we have already lined up for OTT. And very interestingly, we have found the sync between some of the stories that we have carried in our magazine, which is being created into the OTT platform material. So there is a huge amount of synergy between the content that we create, the entertainment, as well as the non-fiction content that we create for our magazine, and which can go into the OTT platform. So as we speak, we're talking to Prime, and we're talking to Sony, and as well as Hotstar. And we believe over the next few years, every year we should have at least a couple or 2 or 3 OTT products which are coming out from our stable.
Wonderful. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking to the same class, and we were discussing the case on Balaji.
Okay.
And we were talking about how OTT platforms are a distributor.
Yeah.
You're effectively telling us that no, OTT platforms are a publisher, are broadcasters, rather than just pure distributors.
Correct.
And we were talking about how Balaji does content creation, publishing, broadcasting, and then distribution.
Yeah.
And effectively, Vikatans repurposing what all these OTT platforms can do. Wonderful. Take us through.
So the OTT game, I just wanted to also make a small point here. Many have asked us why we didn't start our own OTT platform. Okay, and it's very simple. OTT is a game of extremely deep pockets, and we are talking about the international giants. We're talking about Disney Hotstar. We're talking about Woot, which is basically Viacom. We're talking about Z, and of course Amazon and the others. So we're really talking about the big players.
Right.
So in this game, actually getting into the OTT publishing space is an extremely investment intensive game. And we believe that while people are digging for gold, which is basically all the OTT players are digging for gold, we would rather, work with the shovels, and we try to create more shovels. And, we work with all the platforms, and we rake in our money with that, not necessarily by also digging for gold.
Wonderful. Tell us about the pandemic. Through the pandemic, the demand for content just grew up. The demand continued growing hugely, and the supply was seriously constrained, both in terms of logistics as well as in terms of field reporters on the field, collecting stories or writing things. How did we manage this demand supply gap?
So I think one of the good things that happened for us is that as we stepped into, as an organization, we have been in transformation mode for about 4 or 5 years now. So 5 years ago, we were still a print first, digital also media house. But 5 years ago, we kind of took a call and as an organization, we said we need to be digital first and we need to be media agnostic as far as content goes. So our reporters have been used to, doing their, taking their mobile phones and, keying in their content, making audio posts, taking video posts, and, and we have a CMS which is completely operable from the mobile. And the great thing that happened during the pandemic was that the moment we knew that things were really going out of hand, 1 week before the actual lockdown, we were able to start working from home, right? And we were able to continuously create, curate, and publish content throughout the pandemic, even though we were constrained in terms of moving out. We weren't able to move out as much as we wanted to, but notwithstanding that, our contacts and all the information that we were able to gather and all the work that we were able to do behind the scenes, we were still able to do that. Of course, we did not go out the way news channels went out, and we did not have those kind of live telecasts in the beginning, in the first 3 weeks of the pandemic. But subsequently, after the first 3 weeks, things pretty much came back to normalcy. We were going out, we were doing things, and I don't think there was a there were I would say there was a news glut. I would say there was a content glut. I don't think there was really scarcity as much as scarcity in quality news,
Quality.
right? So there was enough going around, and WhatsApp was, completely inundating our mind with all kinds of theories about the pandemic. But I think where we attempted to fill the gap was to really try and talk to the people, the frontline workers, the doctors, the healthcare professionals, as well as the government and all the entire government machinery which was involved in caregiving. So we tried to bring in the reality into the entire news, rather than just trying to build up on the news cycle which was already there.